Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode number 50 of the Primetime Rundown interview series powered by StreamYard right here on the Eastern Observer, I-95 Sports Network, and Zingo Television, channel 198. We can't thank all of you enough for tuning in and making us a part of your Monday evening. I'm your host, Ian Schraier, and what better way to celebrate this milestone episode than by welcoming in the leader of the governing body of athletic communications professionals. We're talking about the president of CoSIDA, as well as the associate athletic director for strategic communications at Gallaudet University, Sam Atkinson. Sam, first of all, a very happy Thank Your SID Week to you, and thank you for spending some time with us tonight.
Of course, Ian, and thank you for that, and also thank you to you and what you do in the SID business, but to all SIDs during CoSIDA Membership Recognition Week, and thank your SID.
And we're very happy to have you, and thank you so much for that, Sam. But before we get started, we invite our viewers to join the conversation. If you have a question for Sam at any point during the show, we ask that you please drop it into the comment box, and we will try to answer them throughout the evening. And also a reminder that tonight's interview is available for download on Apple and Google Podcasts, or you can subscribe to the Primetime Rundown on Spotify and iHeartRadio and tune in that way. So, Sam, let's get started here. You're CoSIDA president. You're also an associate athletic director. You're obviously juggling a lot of responsibility, but how have you yourself been able to manage all of these responsibilities in the wake of an ongoing pandemic?
You're starting heavy here, Ian, with the big question. So it's been a unique year for everyone, without a doubt. And this year, more so than any other year, has been a difficult one with everything going on with the pandemic. Basically, since March, everything's kind of been upside down for everyone, and I'm sure a lot of us are chomping at the bit to get back to some type of normalcy. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we're just not there yet. And trying to juggle, your personal life, dealing with your work life, and then on top of that with CoSIDA, it has been a difficult year. Is trying to make sure you checks and balances and with everything, but we're getting through it. And I think sometimes when there is, they always say when there is a crisis, never waste a crisis. There's always an opportunity within a crisis. Try to find that silver lining, even though it's we've had some difficult conversations at the Gallaudet level, at the CoSIDA level this year. We will get through this together, and hopefully we'll come out better on the other end. And I think we've learned a lot in this field of SID work, but also in the field of collegiate athletics. I think we've learned a lot about our business and how we can improve and how we've been able to streamline a lot of things with technology. And, I think we'll see a big difference just in how collegiate athletics looks moving forward.
It seems like these last 10 months, we've seen a lot of furloughs, a lot of just a lot of people losing their jobs, but also a lot of people staggering their schedules in the wake of COVID-19 to try and avoid as much exposure as possible. We've seen Division I play a full schedule. Division II and Division III, as well as Gallaudet, has not gotten back to full athletics yet. But for you, have you been working for the most part virtually? Has it been a combination? Are you back on campus full time? What has it been for you so far?
Yeah, you're looking at it. I'm here in my basement. But I've been here since March, and it's been weird. I remember just leaving my office at Gallaudet and still having the calendar up there for March 2020 and all the different baseball and softball games we had planned, and just thinking that, hey, we might be back at some point. Didn't think we would be back, over a year now, because Gallaudet announced in November that we wouldn't have any athletics at all for the winter or spring. So we will not host another game until next fall.
Wow.
So to think of our last game that I went to was March 8th of 2020. And let's just say our first game is September 1st of 2021. You're looking at over 540 days between games, which is crazy. Also, it's, for me, it's unique that I'm the CoSIDA president this year, and I'm going to go a whole year without hosting or staffing a game. But what I said earlier, as far as trying to stay positive, look at the silver lining. What can we do during this downtime. And there's different projects, of course, as SIDs we can always be working on, but it's also giving me more time. Personally, with the work-life balance, I'm here with my daughters. I have 2 daughters, and they're doing virtual school. They've been doing virtual school since March of last year as well. So, as I like to say, I have Daddy Day School here. I got 2 enrolled, and we have great retention levels. So we have 2 enrolled for the spring semester as well. But you have to juggle different things, and I know a lot of people within collegiate athletics. There's been a lot of tough conversations and discussions and decisions that have been made. As the president of CoSIDA, myself, along with Doug Vance, our executive director for CoSIDA, have been reaching out to members throughout the year. Once we heard about different furloughs or cuts or people losing their jobs, and it's tough. And it's tough to have those conversations. It definitely seems like certain areas have gotten hit harder than others. Even certain levels have been hit harder than others. But I think right now, for the most part, it looks like right now with collegiate athletics, most of those furloughs or cuts are done for now, hopefully. And it looks it looks like we're trying to get back, to hopefully a normal fall once we get there.
I'm hoping, just like you are, the words "normal fall" sound so good right now. Even though at Adelphi we're preparing for a spring season, I just can't wait for everything to return back to normal. Sam, I have to say that it's been nagging me, the fact that over your right shoulder you show your pride for the state of Maryland with a couch pillow, and you're originally from the Baltimore, D.C. area, and you haven't left since. So we all have to have a start somewhere, Sam. And I want to ask you, what was, because we all love sports. We wouldn't be in this business if we didn't. So can you tell me, just describe your childhood for me, and really what grew your love of sports into what it is today?
Growing up, like a lot of people, you get drawn to sports just by either playing it in school or even seeing it on television. And I grew up in the countryside of Maryland, in the suburbs, and we didn't get many channels. We never had cable television. We just had the 3 main networks, and then Fox got introduced at a later point. So I'm used to watching the game of the week or This Week in Baseball or different shows like that. And you kind of just get hooked on that because you didn't have many choices as far as what you're going to watch. But I think growing up, like in high school, I really wanted to get into journalism and writing, and sports. It was always something I always drew to, and enjoyed watching the games and wanted to become a writer. Growing up reading the Washington Post and the Baltimore Sun on the weekends, and really diving into Sports Illustrated and reading different materials about sports, grew my interest. My family wasn't really big into sports, and I give my dad credit for just putting up with me and taking me to games, and it wasn't his thing, but he knew that I enjoyed it so much. And going, for me, I used to go to minor league baseball games, and kind of like the SID mentality, the first one there, last one to leave, because I'm trying to run around trying to get autographs from ball players. And my dad was just there for the ride and enjoyed just making conversations with the ushers or people that were there. So to me, that's got the sports bug going in high school. And then also that was a great picture of Bob Kenworthy, who used to be the SID at Gettysburg College. That's another story, but when I got the Bob Kenworthy Award, I went up and spoke with him when that happened in around 2016 or 2017. But anyway, back to sports. Went to college at Salisbury University on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Again, you can see the Maryland pride here. Big lacrosse school, was always hooked on lacrosse, and just continued to write in sports in college, and branched out from just doing the college newspaper to the local daily newspaper, the Daily Times. And then it was at Salisbury that I started working in television as well. So that's how it started. I've always been a big sports fan, and basically just kind of came out of my own willing from reading newspapers and just watching kind of national games of the week.
So for you, growing up and I believe you grew up in the town of Phoenix, Maryland, right?
That's right. Northern Baltimore County area. There's a place called the Hereford Zone. Quick story, Hereford Zone is notorious in the Baltimore region for always having their schools being canceled because of snow, because we were out in the country and they couldn't plow the roads fast enough. So they would always say Baltimore County 2 hours late, Hereford zone closed. So we lucked out a lot up there in Hereford, which is right on the border of Pennsylvania.
So for you, growing up, as you said, like you didn't get a lot of channels growing up. Maybe whatever was on the nationally syndicated networks, whether, like you said, it was This Week in Baseball, maybe Monday Night Football, whatever it may be.
SEC Game of the Week.
Yeah. I mean, so for you, when you wanted to go see a live sporting event, if it really wasn't the O's, I mean, were you kind of latching yourself onto Terps football and Terps basketball? What was it for you?
Yeah. So, growing up in the late 90s or mid 90s, late 90s, Terp football wasn't much. There was a lot of issues too with Maryland at the time, with even the late 80s, early 90s, where Gary Williams came in for the basketball coach, with Bob Wade and University of Maryland being on probation. But the Mark Duffner days at University of Maryland in the football program, it was some lean years to be a Terrapin fan, and I would definitely follow the Terps basketball team once Gary Williams got there. When Joe Smith was their big recruit at the time in the early 90s, and then transferred over to Steve Francis later. But for me, it was basically Orioles baseball. We didn't have the Ravens at the time. They came in 96, but you grew up always watching the national NFL game because you didn't have a local team. Didn't really cheer for the Washington football team at that time. And then, the Caps they were playing in right outside DC, and the Bullets. So basically you had the Baltimore Orioles were your pro team, and then you kind of latched onto the local college team. But for me, growing up, as I mentioned, like kind of SEC Game of the Week, I actually became a huge Florida Gators fan.
Oh, wow.
So I'm a huge Gators fan. It was back in the era of Steve Spurrier and Shane Matthews and all them, Danny Werfel, and the heyday for the Gators there. And it was fun to watch, and they were always on television. And people always ask, like, why weren't you cheering for Maryland at the time? But like I said, like, Terps weren't on TV all the time. If they were on a Raycom or Jefferson Pilot offshoot station, and those didn't come in as clearly as the CBS station.
So for you really took in a lot of the Danny Werfel versus Peyton Manning rivalry games.
Exactly. You can't spell citrus without UT. So
just showing your love for the Gators and the Gator chop.
Peyton never, defeated the Gators either. So 0-4. So
just showing your passion for the SEC. I love it, Sam.
Hey, it just means more, right?
Let's talk about you as you entered the field and became an SID yourself. You held quite a few positions before your actual start in the sports information business. In fact, you were already exposed by writing for Lacrosse Magazine and Inside Lacrosse. So you already had that experience of what it was like to work with SIDs. And then you became an SID at your alma mater, which is Salisbury University in Maryland. And coincidentally, from your time working with Lacrosse Magazine and Inside Lacrosse, it's a Division III lacrosse powerhouse, Salisbury. So, and you also worked in the TV industry for a short time. So what made you decide between all these experiences that being an SID was for you?
Yeah, like you mentioned a lot of key points there in, growing up, going back to even my high school days, when I was writing for the local or for the high school newspaper, I was calling SIDs, trying to get a press pass to get to a Maryland basketball game or to get to a minor league baseball game, and just trying to advertise myself as a sports writer for a high school newspaper. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Of course, I was never going to get the press pass for North Carolina at Maryland or Duke at Maryland, but the SID, Chuck Walsh, who's now the SID at Florida State, he would give me a press pass to come down to one of the games right around the Christmas time. And it was not one of the marquee games, but I was able to, get that experience, being a media member and being at a collegiate game. So that's where I first got exposed to it. And then, of course, when I was at Salisbury University, I was completely into the student radio, the student newspaper, and even the student run television station. Wow. So working with the SID there, Paul Hanyon, he now works at US Lacrosse, but he was a legendary SID at Salisbury for over 15 years. And worked with him, but I still didn't understand completely what an SID was. But I just knew I had to go through them to get interviews or to be able to sit in the press box. But over those 4 years working at, being a student at Salisbury, you got to know the SID and the role better. And then, of course, as you mentioned, kind of in the 98, 99 timeframe, I started freelancing for Inside Lacrosse magazine and started doing the Face Off yearbook roundups, basically doing the Division III capsules and Division II capsules.
Which still exists today, right?
I know a lot of Division II lacrosse stuff, and your experience at Delphi is one of the top programs in D2 LACs. So to me that was again working through SIDs to set up these different interviews for lacrosse coaches and getting those lacrosse coaches on the line when you're a junior or senior in college and writing those stories. Again, it's like what I try to tell a lot of people is like my whole background of doing newspaper, television, and also websites was basically leading me to become an SID, because now as SID, we have to have all these different types of skills, but I just didn't know it at the time. Maybe looking back at it, I probably would maybe change up my approach in my career and maybe in college as far as getting that experience maybe sooner. But I think it helped working on television after college, writing in newspapers during college, and then when you mentioned going to Inside Lacrosse, that was my first exposure to running a website.
Oh, wow.
And being their first content manager and running InsideLacrosse.com, and then later going over to US Lacrosse and running lacsmagazine.com and uslacrosse.org. So I think, again, it was all those experiences led me to become SID at Salisbury, which was my alma mater, in 2006. And really at the time, I mentioned earlier, Paul O'Hanian came from Salisbury to US Lacrosse, and we kind of flip-flopped. But I've been working with 3 other gentlemen in the US Lacrosse communications team who were all former SIDs, and basically was getting prompted to go become an SID.
You dipped your feet in so many different ponds, even though you had that background, should we say. So for you, when you, granted, when we're talking about 20 years ago, what the SID business was then to what it is today, we're talking 2 different stories, but at the same time, it still wasn't just your typical 40-hour-a-week job. So from all these experiences that you had, it didn't make you stray away from the sports information business.
No, I think anybody that works in sports, I think we all feel fortunate to be working in sports. You're getting paid to go to games, you're getting paid to write about sports. So to me, this kind of always felt like a dream job. Like I always kind of knew, even from my high school days on, that I was going to work in sports somehow, some way, work in the sports industry, and didn't completely know what it was. I think growing up, I always wanted to be like the next Bob Costas, like a lot of people wanted to at that time, or to be on ESPN. And that's why I think in college, I really tried to do the TV bit, and worked and interned at different TV stations, had an internship at CNN, and had that experience, but then understood later that how difficult the television business is, and just knew that I had my talents I could use somewhere else.
Sam, ultimately, in your time at Salisbury, there had to have been, for you at least, when you received that offer to go work at your alma mater, there had to have been a strong comfortability factor there for you as well.
It was. I think I was looking to really take the next step in my career. I've been working in the lacrosse business for several years, and I love the game of lacrosse. I love the people that work in lacrosse, but I was ready to take the next step. For me at the time, my wife and I were about to get married, ready to move on. And Salisbury was a comfort level just because I knew a lot of the coaches still, even though it was 6 years after I graduated. A lot of the coaches are legends in their own right in their respective Division III sports. There isn't a lot of coaching turnover at Salisbury University. So the coaches were comfortable with me coming in. For me, I knew a lot of the admin people still, so there was a comfort level there. One of my good friends at the time was in charge of the alumni office, but now he's a vice president for advancement at Salisbury, Jason Curtin. So it helped having a couple familiar faces and also knowing the layout. The one thing, Ian, that I will say that I wasn't comfortable about was just being an SID. And that fall semester was a nightmare for me as far as a one-person shop. I had one GA, but I never had used Stat Crew before. I was unfamiliar with all the different rules of some sports, and trying to go from 0 to 60 there was really difficult. I'll be honest, my first football game, home football game for Salisbury, basically ended up in tears because I couldn't set the ball to kick it off.
No.
We lost the coin flip, so I had to switch which team was kicking off, and I couldn't even get that right.
Oh, no.
So we did the whole football game by hand that game.
Oh,
and
boy.
It was quite a mess. I had to go back and rewatch tape and everything. And I give a lot of credit to the ACFC coach, SIDs at that time that year, in particular Jim Heath, who's SID at Hampton University now. But Jim was the SID at Apprentice School, and he really kind of held my hand and helped me through that year, especially with football. But I got the hang of it, and we got going. And I appreciate the Salisbury athletic directors and also the coaches being patient with me, but they also understood that I would be able to rise to the occasion. Just coming in there without any previous actual SID experience, I was behind the 8 ball, and then I had to learn on the go. But we got there.
But for you, at least with your background, you at least had a had a grasp of lacrosse terminology, so you knew what a ground ball, a clear, and all those other things were, right?
Yeah, and no issues with Coach Berkman, the men's lacrosse coach, legend down there. That was one of their championship games at Ravens Stadium up in Baltimore. I was actually I had left Salisbury then, and I was working at Gallaudet, but I was helping out at the Final Four weekend here in Baltimore a couple of years ago when Salisbury was in it. But amazing experience working with the men's lacrosse program. My first 2 years there, we went a combined 45-0, won back-to-back national championships. And it was amazing just, working with a program like that. I knew I was excited to work with them and work with all the Salisbury teams. And the one thing was, 21 sports, one-person shop, and almost every single team is good and playing in the postseason. It can be very stressful, but also very rewarding to see the accomplishments by those student athletes and coaches.
So for you got to cover 2 men's lacrosse national championships and ultimately spent 3 years at your alma mater before assuming your current position at Gallaudet, where you were named their sports information director in July 2009. You are now the associate athletic director there at Gallaudet. But you have the unique opportunity of not just working in the heart of our nation's capital, but also what makes Gallaudet even more unique for our viewers that don't know, that Gallaudet is a school that is dedicated to serving the deaf and hard of hearing. I do want to get into that a little more, but first and foremost, what led you to Gallaudet University?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely was not an easy, decision for my wife and I, but at the time, we were expecting our first child, our daughter Claire, and she was born in January 2009. My wife, who grew up in the Columbia, Maryland area here in Maryland, we still had her family back here. My family was still back closer to the Baltimore, D.C. area, more so than the Eastern Shore and Salisbury. So, we wanted to move back to be closer to family and raise our children. But, Gallaudet was in the same conference as Salisbury at the time, the Capital Athletic Conference.
Mm-hmm.
And, to be honest, Gallaudet went through a lot of SIDs and a lot of time when I was a SID at Salisbury. And there was always a lot of questions sometimes, if we were going to be able to get stats in a timely fashion, or, what would happen when our teams would go up there and we wouldn't get a final score or anything. So, I knew there was going to be some challenges there. I know our conference was a little harsh on Gallaudet at the time. They had gone through 5 SIDs in 6 years. And they really gave an ultimatum to Gallaudet to say they needed to find an SID that knows how to do the SID work, and then they can, catch up on the communication standpoint of it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, knowing Gallaudet and doing my research before, applying, I knew, what the potential was at Gallaudet. There's so many great stories here. So many student athletes have overcome a lot of adversity in their life early on. And then, I could see, just being an observer from the Salisbury standpoint, from a distance, there weren't a lot of stories about Gallaudet athletics at that time. There wasn't, the opportunities, or there wasn't somebody pitching those stories consistently about the Bison. And I looked at this as an opportunity to go to Gallaudet and be able to be that bridge from the student athletes and coaches to the media, and share the different accomplishments that those student athletes have done and earned. And it was, quite an experience for me to take that leap of faith, I guess, because I went there not knowing any sign language. I knew there was going to be, a barrier for me, just trying to communicate. And, so, again, I think the other perspective I would like to say about that was this, at Salisbury, it was great. We were winning championships, but the success was almost a given. And it seemed like a lot of those student athletes expected the headlines, they expected the TV coverage. So, looking at Gallaudet, there was, we don't always win, but we have so many great stories that really can transcend a sport, or can transcend a division in a way sometimes, and catch national attention that, I wasn't going to be able to get that at Salisbury in a way. And again, going back to being a storyteller and being able to, help that program at Gallaudet get the recognition that they deserve, and that they need to help get their brand and their name out there. So that was my biggest challenge going to Gallaudet, and we can dive more into, like, maybe, I'm sure you have some follow-up questions about the transition.
Yeah. I mean, my first question for you is, I want to tail back a little bit to your experience in learning the communication part of it, because there aren't too many people I know that know American Sign Language. And for you, you said you didn't really know much, if at all. So what type of challenge did that present to you, knowing that these were the type of doors you were walking into, and this was the type of communication you had to learn and, become a professional at?
Yeah, like, going back to my college days, Ian, one of my roommates, got one of my best friends too, is a guy named Ralph Lusby. Both his parents are deaf, and that was my first experience, with deaf individuals, when his parents would come to visit, and I would have to go through him, and he would have to sign to his parents what I was trying to say, and I always felt awkward, and I couldn't communicate with them, and it was just it was a challenge for me, just with my best friend and his parents. But I also knew that, like, with dedication and learning and patience, of learning a new language, that you can communicate, and you can become a part of that community. So, going to Gallaudet, my interview process was, I had to use an interpreter to answer my questions for me, and that's kind of, it can be daunting for some, that you're interviewing for a job and you have to rely on somebody else to, sign the answers that you're saying. So that was my first moment to be like, all right, this is going to be different. My first couple months with my boss, athletic director Mike Weinstock, we're passing a piece of paper back and forth with questions and comments. Things got real simple, the first couple of years, as far as language and what we're trying to say. And I did take 3 American Sign Language courses. I immersed myself in the language, practice with it, and basically, when you're immersed in it every single day, and when your boss and coaches and student athletes are deaf or hard of hearing, you're the one, as a hearing individual, that you're going to have to change and adapt, and it's not the other way around. So once you kind of get over that, the first year was very intimidating, but I again stayed true to learning, and I think people really appreciate it. What I was able to do just in the first year, as far as trying to kind of clean up the SID office and bring some respect back to Gallaudet, and starting to get some national news and some headlines. I might use my connections to help promote them. They started to realize that I wasn't going to be here just for 1 year, that I was dedicated and I wanted to be here longer. So over time, and one thing I always like to tell people is, American Sign Language, it's one of the most difficult languages to pick up, especially the older you are. And they say it takes about 7 years to become fluent and feel more comfortable in sign language. So for me, my first year, basically up until my third year, I was basically doing what they call SIMCOM, which is simultaneous communication. So I would still be talking and trying to sign. But in the deaf community, you shouldn't be using your voice. So when I'm on campus, I'm signing with my hands and I don't use my voice at all. I might help mouth some of the words when I'm signing them, but I never usually talk when I'm signing and working with individuals on the Gallaudet campus. So that didn't really come until after my third year that I was able to finally turn off my voice. And really, like they had warned me, that it really wasn't until the 7th year there that I really felt more comfortable and had more of respect from the deaf community.
You had mentioned you had said in your first to third years. Now you're in 12 years in at Gallaudet, and you had mentioned before that how much of your work has garnered a national audience. I mean, stories at Gallaudet have been picked up by the Associated Press, Sports Illustrated, the Washington Post, the local and nationally recognized newspaper, USA Today, CBS Evening News. I mean, I can go on, and on top of all of that, your coaches, your student athletes got to take a trip to the White House and meet the Obama administration and meet the former president, the former first lady, and now our current president of the United States, Joe Biden. So how rewarding of an experience was that? But also ultimately for you, how rewarding is it for you every day to work with these type of student athletes?
That's a great question, and I love it, and I love being a part of that Gallaudet community, and being able to recognize our student athletes. Of course, on our websites and social media platforms, but of course, whenever I can get them in their local hometown newspapers or television stations. But of course, the national news is kind of like what's really put us on the map the last couple of years. And you mentioned the Obama administration and us working with them. When I mentioned earlier about leaving Salisbury, my alma mater, and coming to Gallaudet, these were some of the reasons why. And knowing that we have the opportunity to have those exposures that we probably wouldn't have at any other school. We can see the Washington Capitol and we can see the U.S. Capitol from our campus. We're just in the northeast sector of the District of Columbia, but basically from our campus, you can see the Capitol. So what happened with that invite to the White House, it was kind of unique and funny story at the time was our baseball team had won our first conference game in over 150 conference games.
Wow.
It was 11-year streak. We had not won a Capital Athletic Conference game, and we ended up beating Stevenson in baseball, and it happened on April 1st. So it was April Fool's. So
wow.
Our players would use their video phones or call back to their families and tell them, "Hey, we won our first conference game." And the parents would be like, "No, you didn't. You guys always lose." And so they thought it was an April Fool's joke. And I was able to contact my contacts at the Washington Post, and we were able to pitch a story like, "Hey, look at this. Gallaudet won its first conference baseball game in over 11 years. 150 some losing streak has come to an end." Ended up running on the front page of the sports section. Got picked up by the Obama administration because basically the next 2 weeks. New York Yankees were coming to town to be recognized for winning the World Series. The Obama administration had a couple different teams from the local community there for the help fill the room, I guess. But they invited the Gallaudet baseball team. They had a couple other teams from the DC, Northern Virginia area there as well. And our coach, Curtis Pride, a former Major League Baseball player, the only deaf baseball player in the modern era, is our coach, and he had served or played a year with the New York Yankees, so there was a connection there. So we had that opportunity. From there, Coach Pry got selected later onto President Obama's fitness and health team, and that's where we had opportunity to meet Michelle Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama, and go to their fitness and the president's fitness and health committee. They had, a couple other, like Carl Edwards from NASCAR. They had Teddy Bruschi from the Patriots. Michelle Kwan was there, and some
Wow.
other dignitaries that were part of that. Drew Brees was part of that committee at the same time. So we got exposed there and met Michelle Obama. And then another time was there was a Title IX celebration at George Washington University, and they were inviting different women's teams from the DC area, collegiate teams, over to GW, and that's where now President Biden, at the time Vice President Biden, was overseeing that with Arnie Duncan, the Department of Education leader there. So
the names you were rattling off just sounds like the who's who of Olympians and professional athletes. And I just truly, Sam, admire your work at Gallaudet. And even before you became CoSIDA president, CoSIDA has recognized it as well, just as an organization, and presenting you with the Mary Jo Haverbeck Trailblazer Award, which is an award that's presented annually, usually at a convention that we have in person, to someone who has mentored and helped improve the level of ethnic and gender diversity within CoSIDA. So what did it mean to you to be among just a small group of people to receive such a distinct honor?
Yeah, and when I got the phone call last year that I was going to receive this honor, was took my breath away in a way. It was a huge honor, just because this is a unique award that doesn't, always apply to every person in our membership. And knowing the mission of Gallaudet University, and being the national university for the deaf and hard of hearing, we want to give as many opportunities as possible to deaf and hard of hearing students. And every day, when I'm in a normal year, on campus and working with my student athletes, my student workers are deaf and hard of hearing, and grad assistant is usually deaf and hard of hearing. So it's a whole different perspective when you're student workforce. You basically have to communicate in a different language. Our spotters and how we spot games can be different.
Sure.
So I kind of chuckle sometimes when you see some posts about people complaining about something about an SID work. I just, I'd like to see some people spend a day with me and to see how different it would be communicating in a different language. And, maybe some of these little minor issues or gripes that we have in this business would go by the wayside. Just gives you a whole different perspective on life and everything, when you are, in this culture and in this environment. So again, to be able to, for 12 years now, work with deaf and hard of hearing students and help mentor them and try to get them interested, in sports information, but also just in, college athletics, or to expose them to something that maybe they wouldn't have the opportunity to be exposed to as far as college athletics, and putting them in contact with other schools has been great. When different basketball tournaments come through the DC region. A couple of years ago, the Big Ten men's basketball tournament was in, was in DC, and working with their media contact at the time, Jason Yellen, who's now the head SID at University of Maryland, but he was the head SID for the Big Ten, and he allowed me to bring a couple of my student workers with me to them, to the Big Ten tournament, and that was a great experience for them. And this, again, exposing them to that experience and working with a big time basketball tournament was great. So whenever we have those opportunities, I like to try to put, those student workers in contact with, different individuals in this business.
Just being a pioneer. So for you, Sam, when and you speak about the challenges you have just on a game day alone in terms of inputting stats. So for you, where you have a sport like football, you think of really the the fast-paced sports that we as SIDs are responsible for overseeing, like football, lacrosse, volleyball, basketball, and so on. What type of challenge is that for you when you have student assistants that you have to sign for, and how do you communicate that back and forth and keep up with the action going on during the game?
Yeah, it's not easy sometimes, that's for sure. And sometimes, especially when it comes to volleyball, we do try to maybe work with an assistant coach that might be able to voice, that could help me out. Also have a good connection with the Georgetown University Sports Industry Management Program. It's a graduate program for sports industry. And sometimes those students over there need internships. So sometimes they'll work with me in the Gallaudet Sports Information Office. And so those individuals can help out when we have a fast-paced sport like that. But even so, even within football, we work with deaf and hard of hearing student workers. We have the signing down. We have a system down as far as, somebody calls defense, somebody calls offense. We try to keep the signing to a minimum, just so we know it's going to be fast paced, and knowing what numbers and what they're signing, we do our best to follow that. But yeah, it can be quite cumbersome on that. Our press box can be chaotic. Luckily, to some degree, we don't have a busy press box. We don't have a lot of media coming to games on a day by day basis. It's only when we have these national stories that media will show up for a game day. But for most games, we have a controlled environment where it makes it a little easier to focus in on the game and just kind of focus in on signing.
I understand that.
There's a good picture of our setup there. You can see the lovely press box. It's open air, so it's great on a sunny day like that. But we've had some bad games when we've had some rain and cold temperatures. So that's our softball setup. So we don't have So when people complain about not having or have some issues with their press box, or the heat's not working on their press box, I'll take a wall or a press box over some of the situations we have.
So for you, or I see the garbage bag. Are you also an advocate for the cardboard box as well, or what?
You got to be creative, Ian. And we've used plastic bins, so we've used the tarps, the plastic bins. Sometimes when it's too hot out, we'll use that to try to keep the computer cool. We use umbrellas to keep the sun off our back. And then sometimes keep the rain or snow off of us as well. So one crazy setup one time is with going back to that football stadium. It was a snowstorm and it was a soccer game in October. We ended up setting the computer and printer up in the window area right outside our stadium. So I was sitting there and somebody was like texting me the plays, and I was inputting, because soccer wasn't as cumbersome compared to football. So I was able to follow the game from inside and then able to print stats and everything that way. So you just have to be creative sometimes. But if anybody wants to donate to Gallaudet Athletics and help out the Sports Information Office to get a press box, all those donations will be appreciated.
Does that go to the Bison Fund?
Or
just the Sam Atkinson Fund.
Go to Gallaudet.athletics.com. You can make those donations. Earmark it for the SID office.
Sam, you've also had the opportunity of doing something that many of us in our field aspire to do, and that was you served as the national, and you just rolled off, but you just served as the national chair for 2 years on the NCAA Division III Men's Basketball National Committee, which means you yourself had the final say in the championship field for the NCAA Division III Men's Basketball Tournament for the last 2 years, and SID doing this no less. So what was that experience for you, just to represent SIDs as a whole and just for you individually?
Ian, this is probably one of the biggest highlights of my career, was to serve in that capacity on the NCAA Division III Men's Basketball National Committee. To be selected by my peers there, full of ADs and men's basketball head coaches, and earn their respect on that committee, and be selected as a chair was a huge honor. But then to be able to be selected 2 years in a row was, I couldn't never imagine that. You're looking here, it's University of Wisconsin Oshkosh. They won the 2019 Division III Men's Basketball Championship. It's our first year in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So that was a huge honor for me to be able to announce the national champion. You see it on the different Division I championships when the chair gets up there and introduces the team and it passes off the trophy. So that was a huge honor. But just really to work on that committee for 4 years and learn more about the whole process of what goes into selections, what goes into regional advisory council or committees, the RACs and the regional rankings. It was huge. The site selection process of and how the bracket is formulated. It was very eye-opening to me. It was a great professional development opportunity and really a benchmark for my career. And the one thing I would say when I have opportunity to talk about this is just to get more SIDs involved and participate in the NCAA committee level. It's only in the last couple of years that the NCAA finally opened it up to SIDs to apply to be on these committees. And there's been some other Division III SIDs, Scott Musa, Shenandoah, Bill Gorman, Albert Wentworth, have all served on Division III committees. Some former SIDs, David Petroff, who's now with NCAA Stats.
Yep.
He was on the women's basketball committee when I was on the men's basketball committee. Ira Thor, Jersey City, is not in the SID field any longer, but he was recently on the baseball committee. So it's great to see more SIDs being a part of these sport committees and other committees by the NCAA. The one thing I'll say is it was interesting to me. My first year, we went to Salem, Virginia for the Final Four for Division III, and a lot of the members of the national committee at the time, for those ADs and even some of those head coaches, they have never been to a national championship or hosted an NCAA tournament on their campus, so they didn't have that same experience that a lot of SIDs do. Because if you're not hosting, an NCAA tournament or a conference tournament on your campus, a lot of SIDs we volunteer and work out with other national championships. I think bringing an SID onto these NCAA committees, especially these sport committees, should almost be mandated, especially at the Division II and Division III level. Excuse me, because we have so much of a game operations background. We know what goes into the post game. We understand the press conferences. We understand the stats and everything that goes into that, and even just the signage and just the little details. And that was the comments from the committee members when I was a part of this. My first couple of years was that Sam is picking up on all the minor details before the NCAA liaison or other host people are picking up on these details that haven't been done yet, because that's something that as SIDs we look for the details. We don't try to just say that's good enough. Like, we want to make sure that experience is the best experience for the student athletes and coaches that get the chance to participate in the national championship. So I think just having an eye for that, I think it would benefit a lot of the NCAA sport committees, and hopefully one day you'll see SIDs too on the Division I committees, where it's much harder for them to get nominated because they have to be nominated by their conference office. But I hope more SIDs, especially the D2 and D3 level, that serve on these committees and show their worth, will have the opportunity too at the Division I level. So personally, for me, I felt maybe some added pressure as the chair of a men's basketball committee, to kind of go above and beyond those 2 years when I was serving recently. And but I took it was a huge honor, and I know I spent a lot of time devoted to that because I also wanted to make sure that help pave the way for other SIDs to serve in that capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know I could speak for myself, and I had never served on a RAC before, and I had recently applied to serve on a couple of Division II RACs. So it's something that I know I myself, even with 15 years in the business, want to get involved with, and recommend all our viewers that are fellow SIDs that want to do the same. And I want to bring up something here real quick before we shift the conversation here, Sam, is that, I was actually talking to Ira, and he had told me that you have a somewhat of a niche for rapping in an elevator.
Well, I think when you're in elevators, it kind of can get mundane with the music. So, sometimes it's good to beat to your own drum and have your, as I like to say, sometimes I like to walk to a soundtrack. So, sometimes going in the elevator, we want to make sure that we have some fun music. And if a dance party breaks out, it breaks out.
So, Sam, I want to shift the conversation now to your involvement with CoSIDA, which has ultimately resulted in your current presidency here in the 2020-2021 academic year. And before you became president, you served on such a slew of committees and ultimately became the chair, of the CoSIDA Goodwill and Wellness Committee. And just stick with me here, because I just want to talk a little bit about what this committee really does. And this is a committee that has just continued to thrive since its inception. It continues to raise funds for worthy causes year round and just give back to the community. It's such a vital part of bringing community service to the convention. You yourself have orchestrated 6 community service projects, as well as organized what we know as what was the first and now annual CoSIDA 5K run and walk. And today, the CoSIDA Cares hashtag has actually become a well-known staple. And other programs have been introduced, such as the Volunteer 15, which you helped organize, and the CoSIDA Fitness Challenge. So I know that's a lot to take on, but I know from my years going to CoSIDA conventions and seeing you up there at the podium to represent that committee, when you look back on all of the work that began with you and this committee, can you believe, even more so now as CoSIDA president, where you see it today, to see the vast progress that has been made by it?
It's been amazing to see what this committee's turned into be. I think it doesn't give a complete justice if I don't share a little bit about how it started, though, because
Sure, absolutely, please do.
My first convention was in 2007 in San Diego, and at the time, before going out, I wanted to get involved. It was my first year going back to Salisbury, my first year at Salisbury. Couldn't wait for my first CoSIDA convention. I wanted to get involved, so I signed up for a committee and I sent my name in, and I got assigned to the charity committee. I'd never been a part of a committee yet, so I was happy to be a part of this. So went to the first charity committee meeting in San Diego, and myself and only one other person showed up. And the other person was Ryan Klinkner. He's the SID at St. John's, Minnesota, another Division III football powerhouse. And he and I never met. We just started talking, and then Debbie Kopp, who was a former SID at Oklahoma, was in charge of committees on committees. She comes in and she was shocked that anybody showed up for this committee. She's like, we haven't had anybody show for the charity committee for years. So you guys are the first 2 to show up. So you guys can be the chair and the vice chair. And so we started off basically like that. It was
like
Ryan,
a grassroots committee, more or less, just piecemealing it together.
Yeah, and like if anything, I think the story here is for any individual, just even starting out off in SIDs, your first year or 2, like get involved. See an opportunity and take it. So Ryan and I became great friends. We started building this committee up. We started rebranding it. Got rid of the charity component of it as far as just the name, and started to focus in on using Goodwill as far as the charity and volunteer part of it within the wellness, because it ended up being the Goodwill Committee for a while, and then it switched into Goodwill and Wellness later once we added the fitness part of it. But looking at the SID industry, there's a lot of us that could do better. I know myself, I could do better as far as eating, the hours that we work, the press box food, not exercising enough. So that became a big focal point for us. There was at the time too. So a lot of SIDs have been passing away just because of their health, and it was tough news to see. But the other part of it too was the idea of the Goodwill. Initially it was kind of giving back to the host city for the CoSIDA convention. So we started hosting volunteer service projects at the host, or at the city that we went to. And that just kind of built up over time, and we would take donations in during the registration, and we would donate them to the charity. We would take a busload of people over to, during the CoSIDA convention, over to either a shelter or a different area that we were helping in the community, and have our service project there. We started in Marco Island in 2011 with our first 5K. It was on the beach. It was awesome. It was probably the most beautiful 5K we've ever had. But that was, again, like we just, we weren't expecting it to become such a big thing as it is now. And that's a detriment to the committee members who've been, after I left, have been doing amazing work. Chris Mitchell, Megan Harden, Jeremy Rosenthal, Ryan Davis, and many more have been doing amazing work with that committee. And for me, it's kind of like I'm a proud dad just looking at that committee and seeing what they're doing. I can't take credit for the fitness challenge. That's all them after I left. But starting the 5K, starting the service project. Before I left, we started the Volunteer 15 program, which we really wanted to bring attention to what our members and SIDs do on their college campuses and their local communities. There's a lot of stuff that we go to a lot of the different service projects that our teams go to. We're giving back, even within our busy schedules. A lot of us help out in our local communities, churches, local schools. So we wanted an avenue for us to recognize our members for their volunteer work. And I think, looking at all the, kind of other different NACDA and affiliates, and those different groups, CoSIDA has really been a champion in a lot of different levels and different areas. And the health and wellness area, CoSIDA has been out in front of this for over a decade now, and giving back. And we've seen other affiliates try to either start their own thing or ask us about how we went about this. And it really is just because, like, Ryan and I early on wanted to do something with this committee and not just be a part of it. So I think, if anything, hopefully people see that and learn about that, and get motivated to get involved and try to put their own stamp on it.
So we have a couple of questions here, Sam, that we want to get to. And the first one is from a fellow SID of ours and a co-host of mine on the Primetime Rundown, Joey Jarzinka, who asked, to follow up on what you were saying about wellness, that as a fellow SID, how do you keep yourself in shape, exercise, and still promote your sports to the fullest potential with only 24 hours in the day?
It's a great question, Joey. And I think it's, the one thing, we'll probably dive into this later, Ian, too, is the whole idea. You are your best advocate. And you need to, nobody is going to maybe come to you and say, hey, you need to go out and exercise, or, hey, you need to be eating better. If you don't use this as a self-motivating tactic or issue, like, it's not going to get any better. For me, I started running back in 2014, 2015, ended up doing my first half marathon and doing 5Ks, and to start it off gradually. And it was kind of motivation too from the 5K, with CoSIDA, and, trying to, change up your diets. And, I'll admit, like, there's lots of areas I could do a lot better in. But again, as long as we're trying to make an effort, and I think CoSIDA has done a great job, especially with this fitness challenge in the last couple of years, trying to get our members more involved and be a part of something. I think for me, when I started off running early, I joined a local running group to hold myself accountable. And, I think a lot of us lose interest, especially like New Year's resolutions, like, hey, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And then by the end of January, you've completely, fallen off the wagon. I think holding yourself accountable and joining like a fitness challenge or joining a running group, or, having a competition with coworkers can help you get those fitness, time in. But you really need to kind of like be, carving out some time for yourself. So, like, I know when normal time, when I'm at Gallaudet, like, if I can carve out an hour at lunch to go running or to work out, you try to do that. Or even right after work, I would go and meet my running group and run before I got home, because I know once I get home, I'm not going to go out and keep running. So, I think, again, it's just trying to do the best you can. We're still going to have our long weekends or long nights, but if you can plan ahead better, with snacks or your food planning or food prep, instead of like maybe hitting up, the Wawa or Wendy's on the way home, you're going to do a lot better because of that.
Or for you, too many Maryland crab cakes there, Sam, or no?
Yeah, I mean, luckily you can't get crab cakes in a fast food industry. So, like, for me, it's like, Chick-fil-A or Chipotle are downfalls for me sometimes.
And getting back to what you were saying on a more serious note, just to be able to have that work-life balance is just so important, Sam.
It is very important. I know it's always easier said than done. I know, I think anybody that works in industry like sports, or even like the music industry, if concerts, like whenever you're working in entertainment, it's difficult just because of the way the hours are.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, trying to be smart about maybe what you eat and preparing food ahead of time, or being prepared for those busy long days, so you don't fall into a trap of like just ordering pizza or takeout and stuff. So, you just got to do the best you can with it. You're going to have, and the other thing I would say is just don't give yourself, don't beat yourself up over it. If you have a bad day, and eat bad, or you didn't work out, it happens. But, I think at the end of the day, we could be doing work 24/7. I always say, my wife always says to me sometimes, like, do you have work to do? I said, I always have work to do. But you know,
Join the club. Join the club.
you need to be able to turn your phone off, or be there and be present with your family. And that's like the one thing, I guess, with the whole pandemic and being here at home. Like my commute is like just going upstairs instead of being stuck in DC traffic for an hour and a half or 2 hours sometimes.
Oh, boy.
So the commute for me is brutal. So I've had a great year as far as being here with my daughters and my wife and being present with them and trying to make up for a lot of lost time from busy weekends and stuff. So it has been a different change of pace. It has definitely been a better work-life balance, but I know it's not going to last forever. But I also just tell people that are probably listening now who might be in the same situation, is just enjoy it as best you can, because it probably won't last like this forever.
Very true, and just makes you a saint for dealing with that DC traffic there, Sam. For the last,
it's brutal, man. It's brutal. And I have to go 20 miles, and sometimes it can take an hour and a half. So it's not fun.
No. And Joey, thank you so much for the question. And Lenny, I see your question as well, and we will get to that in a little bit. But in the meantime, though, talking about you spending all those years on the Goodwill and Wellness Committee, what was formerly, as you said, the Charity Committee, can you just advocate how important it is to get involved with committees and how fellow SIDs can actually get involved in doing so?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned earlier with the Goodwill and Wellness Committee, for me, that was my opportunity to give back to CoSIDA. The organization itself at the time had given me a lot just to, start to learn more about the SID industry, to start building up my network. And then over time, the joy that we got out of what we're doing with the Goodwill and Wellness Committee, and knowing what a spotlight or helpfulness it was to CoSIDA as an organization to have this committee doing stuff at the convention city that we were going to, and helping out and getting recognition for CoSIDA in a different way, and kind of portraying SIDs in a different light, I think was, very rewarding. But at the same time, that was starting to build up, after you've been a part of this committee for 7 or 8 years as a chair, people were starting to recognize, who you were and what you were doing. And, you started to network even more at the conventions, and people knew more of who you were. And then you start getting asked to be on panels and different things because of that, but also on different subject matters. So it just kind of branched out over time. And then it got to the point where I was like, well, maybe I can make a run here at trying to get on the board. Never thought, at president, but just trying to get onto the board for a 3-year rotation would have been amazing. And was able to achieve that in 2015. And that was a huge highlight. And I think once you get on the board, then you're like, all right, well, then maybe I can think about, trying to run for president at some point, and trying to get into that rotation as an officer. So, I would just say, for those who are new to the industry, or even those who are just, been in the industry, maybe you haven't been a part of CoSIDA in a while, we would love to have you be a member and come back. For us, we represent over 3,000 sports information directors at all different levels. There's a lot to be proud of from this organization, and there's always a home for anybody that's looking to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And, for me, any young person trying to get into this business, or you're in the business and you're trying to get involved, join a committee. Maybe also, it doesn't always have to be CoSIDA. If there's something within your conference, join the committee there. Just get involved. I think trying to do some work outside of your day-to-day job will kind of give you a different perspective of things. And sometimes it's a healthy outlet also, with stress, of course, and different things. But again, trying to build up your network, trying to show your worth, showing SIDs in a different light, especially getting involved with your conference or a national committee like the NCAA. There's great opportunities, but you gotta, jump in there and get involved. And if you are looking to get involved with CoSIDA, reach out to any board member or anybody in our CoSIDA staff. Lori Bolig does a great job with all of our committees. Usually we try to assign people to committees during the summer, but sometimes we'll have people roll off in the middle of the year. So they're, it's always worth emailing Lori to see if there's an opportunity to join now, or at least be put on the list to join later. Because of those over 3,000 members, we have about 500 that end up being a part of a committee of some sort. So there's always lots of opportunities for those that want to be a part of that.
Well said, but I want to go back for a second here, Sam, to what you had said about recognition and in addition, including your involvement with the Goodwill and Wellness Committee and how you really started it. You were named the recipient of the Bob Kenworthy Community Service Award in 2014, another prestigious honor that CoSIDA awards every year. So what did this distinct honor mean to you on a personal level?
Yeah, so that came in 2014, and that was a huge honor because that was my first major, I guess, national award for myself within the CoSIDA ranks, and it kind of showed me that everything that we had been doing with the Goodwill and Wellness Committee, kind of paid off in a way. And I remember in that speech and when I received that award, how much that meant to the whole committee, and also to my good friend Ryan Klinkner, who actually got the Rising Star Award that year for himself. So I felt bad calling him. I say, hey, I got some news. I got the Kenworthy Award. And he's like, oh, that's good because I got the Rising Star Award. So he felt bad that he got the Rising Star Award and I didn't get an award, and I felt bad the other way. But it worked out for us. And but again, it was like some very dedicated committee members that bought into what Ryan and I were trying to do with the committee. And then also getting the support from CoSIDA as an organization, and the board was always big supporters of what we were doing. And we started off small, and we started off with a community service project. We started off with a smaller 5K, and now see where it is now. It's amazing. And so again, getting the Kenworthy Award was a big honor for me. I read up about Bob. I didn't know Bob that well. Bob Kenworthy, he's still alive up in Gettysburg, and he is a former SID at Gettysburg College. And a couple of years ago, my family and I went up to Gettysburg to see a Salisbury lacrosse game in the national semifinal game, and they were playing at Gettysburg. And we stopped at the Kenworthy's house before we got to the Salisbury game and visited with him, and it was a big honor just to meet him in person. And actually that led to us trying to get Bob to come down to the 2018 CoSIDA convention in DC. So he came down, and it was his first time back at a CoSIDA convention in a long time. So it was great to bring that connection back and kind of full circle for Bob, who had given a lot of his time during his heyday to CoSIDA, in addition to being a great SID at Gettysburg. So again, it was just a big honor and a big recognition for that committee to see how far it had, what it came from to where it is then, and then of course where it is now, where it's on to bigger and better things.
So Sam, let's segue now into your appointment. You had already kind of initially discussed it, your appointment to the CoSIDA Board of Directors in June of 2015, as you made your way up the chain to your current role of president. So initially, when you received this appointment to the board, what was that like for you to know that you would have the opportunity to give back to the field that has already given so much to you?
Yeah, and I think at the time, it was a big deal just to be a Division III person too, on the board to represent Division III. And to be selected in that capacity was a big honor. But once you get to the board, you're not completely focused on your school, of course, or your region or your division. You're really looking at a whole organizational standpoint, and sometimes some decisions that might be better for one division or the other, you can't worry about that. You want to worry about what's best for the organization. So I would say my first year was a big learning curve. Kind of like sat back a little bit just to try to figure out what was going on and learning the ins and outs of the board, and trying to work on those relationships with those other board members that maybe I didn't know at the time, because I went from being the chair at a committee level and knowing that small tight-knit group, to now being on a board where you're exposed to different divisions and different other levels that you weren't maybe exposed at the committee level. So And of course, if anything, with boards and even on campuses, there are different politics, and trying to understand the different ways of how to second a motion, and all those other things that you have to do.
Mhm.
The
Absolutely.
different rules, but I think as a first year board member, you take a lot of it in. And I try to voice my opinion where I could, but then you get more comfortable, and of course, like the second year was a lot more comfortable for me to try to be more of a leader within that room.
And you're escalating in a way. So your first year, think about like you're entering your freshman year of college, or your first year at any job. It's just you're trying to acclimate yourself to your new surroundings in a way. Go
For
ahead.
sure. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think like you just said, anything like that, it takes a while to get your bearings and understand. Like you don't want to burn any bridges coming in right away, and you want to know what's going on, and try to find your flow or your fit. And you get assigned to different committees to be a liaison to and stuff like that. So it just takes some time.
And Sam, when you had accepted the gavel last year from Herb Vincent, the past president from the Southeastern Conference, and might I add, a nice catch, by the way, as well. Um, you actually are only.
Still have it right here, Ian. So not that far away from me.
You're only now the second, and quote me if I'm wrong here, the second Division III president in the 60+ year history of CoSIDA.
That's right. Yeah, as far as Division three's actually only been around since 1980 or so. Eric McDowell was SID at Union College up in New York. Division three, but I will say they have Division one ice hockey, so I would say I'm probably the only D3 through and through.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
But Warren Berg, back in the day, was a CoSIDA president. I pulled this up because I thought this question might come up, but Warren Berg was the president at 1963-64 at Luther College, which is a Division III school now, but at the time was not Division III. But for myself, being only the fifth SID to be president, and during my presidential year to be at a college division school, D2, D3, NAIA, 2-year U Sports, it's a huge honor. Something that, to me, it was unfortunate not having an in-person convention to be able to show other college division SIDs that, one of their own have gotten to this level, to become the president of this organization, the 66th president. And to think out of 66, only 5 have been from a college division level. And we're going to have back-to-back years now of college division with Cindy Potter from Columbia College, first NAIA official president, and our 5th female president in our organization. Is huge next year. So, it's a different time, and it's great to see all these different leaders. And, going back to the committee work, a lot of our committee chairs now, if you look at them, are a lot of college division leaders from D2 and D3 and NAIA and U Sports and the 2-year colleges. So it's great to see, individuals from those different levels who usually probably don't have as much manpower or resources as Division One level has, but those individuals are still putting in extra time to do the different works within CoSIDA and become future leaders for this organization.
Let's rewind a little bit before the virtual convention in June and back to March, because at that point, CoSIDA and yourself, you were preparing to host the convention for the first year that it was going to be in Las Vegas, and then COVID strikes, right? So what can you tell the audience and me as well what that fateful day in March was like for you, not only as first vice president of CoSIDA and dealing with everything you had to deal with from a national perspective, but also at an institutional level at Gallaudet?
So I have a different story of that day, that March 12th. Also going back to what we talked about earlier, being about the chair of the Division III men's basketball tournament. We were in our second week of the Division III men's basketball tournament at the time. I was driving from my Ellicott City, Maryland area, just outside DC, south down to Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia, for the third round of our men's basketball tournament, where Christopher Newport CNU was going to be hosting Hobart College on that Friday night. So this was Thursday. I was driving down for the open practice day with the teams. And when I was driving down there, every 15 minutes, there was my phone blowing up, or there was a break-in on the news saying that the SEC tournament is stopped, the Atlantic Coast Conference tournament is stopping. It wasn't looking good for the basketball tournaments across the landscape. I was in touch with our Division III staff liaison in Indianapolis, and we had some, I guess, first indications of this the week before at Johns Hopkins. Was our opening weekend of the Division III men's basketball tournament, and that's where we had 3 other schools: Penn State Harrisburg, and drawing a blank on the one, but then Yeshiva from the New York City area was coming down to Baltimore for their first round game. And the Johns Hopkins was basically changed their setup for that game because they didn't want any fans, because there had been a report of a COVID positive test or somebody positive from COVID on the Yeshiva campus. So that was our first, I guess, dive into this at the NCAA Division III level. We had a lot of calls going into that game. I ended up going to that game. I wasn't assigned to be there, but being, basically 15, 20 minutes away from Johns Hopkins where I live, and the NCAA liaison, Alex Mortallero, had a fly-in from Indianapolis because of the situation. It was unique, different, and just kind of the tip of the iceberg of where we were going in sports at the time. So I think, COVID was so new, we didn't know it. A lot of the stuff that we, of course, know now. And kind of looking back at that, probably would switch, the way we did some things, of course, there. But we got through that weekend, and then we were full force ahead until that Thursday, when basically the night before the Jazz game, when Gobert tested positive, and that kind of started that snowball effect. And then driving to Newport News, and they were canceling games. Gallaudet, we weren't scheduled to play another game until the weekend for baseball, softball. So we hadn't made a decision yet from a Gallaudet standpoint. But basically, later that afternoon, I was supervising Hobart's open or closed practice before their game on Friday night, and we got the email from Mark Emmert to say that all NCAA competitions was halted. And basically that was the end of the Division III basketball tournament. It was a shock. It was surreal. It was, for me, it was my last year on the committee, and we had put a lot of work into that, and we were looking forward to that championship. That was going to be a joint championship. The Division III championship game was going to be played with the Division II championship game in Atlanta, alongside the Division I Final Four. So we had our eyes on that, and then all of that goes up in smoke, basically, with that email. So it was a big disappointment, of course. A huge disappointment for the 16 teams that were still playing for the Division III tournament at that time. Luckily, we were able to at least start our tournament. Division I never got to that point. But again, it was kind of surreal to see, basically those 8 hours of, me driving down there, all the different news breaking, and then being at the practices, and then basically having to tell a team, hey, you're not going to be able to play tomorrow, and your season's over. And it's, I can't look back at that bracket and not get sort of upset just to think of what could have been for those 16 teams. And how unique and special opportunity that was for Division III basketball. And, we probably won't see another joint championship for a while. And, look forward to whenever we do have that opportunity again. But, that was kind of like, the first major thing that hit me in the face with, the COVID-19 pandemic. And then just trying to get home the next day safely. And it was kind of, a little scary with all the different news reports. And I think a lot of us weren't sure what was going on. And ended up going to Gallaudet and just getting a couple computers because we were told we were going to work remote, at the time. And, I've been remote since.
And I want to go back to what you had said about that tournament at Hopkins, because as a native New Yorker and someone who lives in New York, a lot of the attention when the world came crumbling down was at the last sporting event that took place, or collegiate sporting event that took place, was a game at Madison Square Garden, the Big East tournament between Creighton and St. John's. And for me, being from New York and knowing the SID from Yeshiva, AJ O'Hagan, who a lot of us do know. I was actually following along with the broadcast that whole weekend before everything had gotten canceled. So I remember following along with the broadcast and the report that Johns Hopkins was going to be the first school to close their doors to fans for the NCAA tournament so they could try and get those games played. And it was just such an interesting, at the time, before we knew what would become of the pandemic, it was just such an interesting time to see, hear no fans, no crowd noise. It was just players, coaches, scores table, and staff. So it just, we thought everything was thrown for a loop then. You fast forward a week and it was just a whole nother ball game. Sam, speak a little bit about, you had 3 months, albeit during a pandemic, to prepare for this presidential role. I can only imagine how you yourself in that situation were feeling if this was a normal time and we didn't have a pandemic to deal with, about you taking on this presidential role. Now you have a pandemic that you're going to lead CoSIDA through. So what were the days like leading up for you, and how you prepared for the year ahead?
Sure. Just to go back real fast, it was WPI was the other team that was at Hopkins.
Yeah.
I had to look that up. That was bugging me. I apologize. But anyway, I think, in March, we didn't know right away what CoSIDA was going to look like as far as the convention. We ended up making an announcement in April alongside with NACTA once those conventions were called off, and switched to a virtual format. And again, of course, bittersweet. It was great to ascend to the president role, and again, going back to, in a crisis, look for the opportunities, look for the silver linings. And for me, I was able to accept being CoSIDA's president in shorts and on my deck in my backyard, and my daughters were with me, and my wife, and it's probably not what I had envisioned. It clearly wasn't. 2 years prior, I had written an acceptance speech and already had it ready to go, but everything switches, and that's fine. And I think that's the biggest thing that we've learned through this pandemic, is you have to, as people love to use the word, pivot and switch things up and go in a different direction. So for me, accepting the presidency was a huge honor, still is. It was different. I wish I was able to give that speech in a ballroom with other, 900,000 different SIDs in the room. And I mentioned earlier, just to be able to represent somebody from the college division on that podium would have been, to me, a big deal for our division and our level within the ranks. But at the end of the day, I'm the president of CoSIDA. We're leading the entire organization, and the main focus is just to try to keep this organization moving forward, and doing the best we can with what the pandemic has thrown at us. And just like any other school or conference, there's been financial difficulties that we've had to navigate, and of course, tough discussions and decisions. So a lot of what I had envisioned about my presidential year, and maybe having more fun and different things with it. We've gone a lot more serious and somber. But it's a time and place for everything. We can't ignore the facts of what's going on in our society and our community. And I think a big thing that's come out of this for CoSIDA is being a leader within collegiate athletics when it comes to racial and social justice. And that was been a big focus for our board and our organization starting last summer. And, we've been able to host these different webinars, and critical conversations has come out of that. And seeing SIDs be leaders, dealing with how to get that message out from your student athletes on a serious subject. So I think, different things that we weren't thinking about, 3 months before I became president, became, smack dab right in our face right away when I became president, and we had to deal with and address. And I'm really proud of how our board and staff have adapted to everything, and doing the best we can. I think a lot of us are missing being in person, and
Really?
being back to normal and hosting games. But I think a lot of us, are getting tired of seeing each other in our houses and in these little boxes. And but again, using the technology to our advantage. For CoSIDA, for example, holding a lot of these meetings virtually, it was one thing where we could save money to help the organization, through this year. But again, CoSIDA is good. We're doing great work, with everything that's going on. We're trying to be there for our members, and we started a membership donation drive to help with members that couldn't afford memberships. I think a lot of the different programmings and different outlets that we've provided to SIDs, our coffee shops, have helped with those outlets of connections. Again, not being in person and having that physical contact and seeing each other, but just being able to be there for a lot of people that might be going through some hard times.
Well, we can say this, Sam, that we've all become pros in some way of how to work Zoom, Google Meet, and FaceTime. That's for sure.
Without a doubt.
So CoSIDA, unfortunately, I mean, as a result of the pandemic, the convention is going to go virtual again this year. So there will be no convention, at the Orlando World Center Marriott. So we'll hopefully all prepare for another in-person convention in 2022 back in Las Vegas. And at that point, this summer, you'll present the gavel, as it was to you last year, to Cindy Potter as the next president of CoSIDA. But I wanted to get to another question, and we do ask for all of our viewers to please have these questions keep coming in. And Lenny Reich, the famous, as I should call him, SID at Mount Union, wanted to say that, what do you think that you will take with you from the leadership opportunities that you have had going forward, Sam?
Well, I appreciate Lenny with that question. Lenny is a proud member of our board and does a great job at Mount Union and representing Division III and being a part of the CoSIDA board. But I think when it comes to looking back at some point, when you kind of can relax from all this, it's interesting to look back at the different challenges you face, within this past year. Again, saying, like, looking for the silver linings. When there is a crisis, there is opportunity. And sometimes those opportunities are difficult at the time, but in the long run are going to be better for the organization, better for your conference, better for a national office. So, I would say, being adaptable and flexible, and I think a biggest thing, and I think a lot of SIDs are good at this, is just being able to listen. And see where people are coming from and perspective. And I think, if anything, this pandemic has also kind of slowed things down. I'm not sure about you, Ian, but for me, it's like watching some of these pro sports or even the college sports that are on television. It's just different. It doesn't feel right without the crowd. So it's great that we have the games, but they don't feel the same. And for me, I think it's it wasn't like must-see television. As far as, like, I think a lot of us as sports fans would build our weekends or free time around watching the big game, and really, working through the last 11 months in a serious pandemic, your priorities change to a smaller list. A lot of these gripes, you see the SIDs posting, like, those things go out the window quickly. When your priority is your health and your family and your job, and just, making sure everything's good as far as, financially and having that job, that's your priority. As much as I enjoy watching the Gators, that was, like, probably my least priority, when, the weekend came around. So I think, if anything, as a leader, it's just trying to adapt through any situation that you might be in, and planning for and being prepared for the unexpected. And you'll never be prepared for everything. I don't think any of us were prepared for a pandemic like this. But learning from what I took away from the basketball committee, dealing with the whole Hopkins situation, to canceling a whole national tournament the next week.
Right.
It's just some experiences you wish you were never a part of, as far as having to cancel something like that. But just knowing the gravity of a moment like that, and how that's going to change history in a way, as far as looking back at Division III basketball, but also just the way things will look as in the history of CoSIDA, having 2 virtual conventions.
Yeah. And I mean, look, you said it best there, Sam, that, we don't know how we all feel, but I could tell you from my side that if we have a spring at Adelphi, I cannot wait to get out there and freeze. And, in the cold March days for baseball and softball, I truly can't wait. I just feel so bad for our student athletes. And I know we all do at our respective schools, because that in the end is who we do this for. And aside from us loving the job, that's ultimately what it's about. So let's talk a little bit about the week that's coming to a close, and we had mentioned it in the top of the show, Sam. Thank Your SID Week, which came into its inception 5 years ago. It's CoSIDA's annual recognition week, hashtag Thank Your SID. And you've been on the board since this recognition week's been introduced. So we realize how vital it is to recognize the hard work of our peers and fellow professionals in the field. But how important was it for CoSIDA to start this initiative?
Yeah, Ian, my first year on the board of directors, in 2015-16, Will Rollison, our associate executive director for CoSIDA, had brought this idea ahead to the board to think about. Hey, why don't we have a national SID day or week? And they started off with a little working group, and I was actually a part of that. I was as a member of that board, working with Will and a couple other members of our board at the time, and just as a working group, trying to build up to our first membership recognition week that was in November. And it's always kind of been in November, kind of that crossover time from the end of fall sports into winter. This year, of course, we had to make the difficult decision with so many sports not being played, so many different divisions not fielding teams, that the fall was probably not going to be the best time for us to roll this out. And we ended up opting to do this in January over the spring, just knowing the possibility of what the spring could look like for many of us was still up in the air, still is now, to be frank. But, at least here in the winter, we have some schools at every different level, at least playing something. It's still not the same level as a normal year, of course. But looking back at this, this is our 5th year of Membership Recognition Week, our Thank Your SID. I think, remember the first year, it was like we were excited to try this, and then it was kind of lukewarm reception. It took a while, but we stuck with it, using our connections as an organization to our allies at the NCAA and our different media contacts, and really started to build this up. And it was really, I think last year was probably one of the best years as far as buy-in from maybe some schools we haven't heard from in a while. It was great seeing more Division I colleagues getting recognized at the higher level and getting more media exposures or shout outs on ESPN or CBS and different games of the week and stuff like that. So it's been building, and we wanted to keep this going, even though this is working through a pandemic year. We also felt like this is a kind of maybe a shot in the arm that might help our profession too, going through some difficult times, and for our members, maybe get some recognition from their own campus or their conference. Hopefully helps them try to get through this spring semester, and hopefully get back to a normal fall ahead of us.
And I think we also saw last year in mentioning about the Division I community, and we saw so many posts, as you said, from Division I schools and some really lauded coaches. Jay Wright from Villanova posting with his SID, John Calipari doing the same, Roy Williams at North Carolina, and so on. It's just fantastic to see all the recognition that a job that sometimes in a way can be very thankless is just getting all of this recognition.
Yeah, and one thing I like to add, because a lot of people will throw this out saying, like, I'm an SID. I don't want to talk about myself. I don't want to, try to publicize something that I'm looking for congratulations or a thank you. But what I will say to that is, again, going back to when we first started this conversation, is like you have to be your best advocate for yourself. And it's tough for the people in the one-man shops. I'm used to writing these press releases about myself or this week because I know nobody else will do it. But I also know that if I don't do it, people are not going to know about it. And it's, I don't do it looking for the recognition or, the thanks, but I do it to make sure that people understand the importance of what we're doing in this profession. And I think the one misnomer for a lot of people and the questions we get is, what is an SID? And what we do is completely different than what it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, of course, 20 years ago. And a lot of us are basically our own sports networks.
Yeah.
We're a one-person shop. We're doing video. We're doing social media. We're doing websites. We're doing writing. We're doing pitches. We're doing sponsorship. We're doing revenue, ticket sales. Different things at different levels. Game operations. So we all wear a lot of different hats. But I think it's important, and it's important for everybody that's a part of this field to be proud of what we do. And to promote the field and the profession in a positive light. And if that means for myself having to write my own press release for CoSIDA Membership Recognition Week, I'm going to do it. Just because I want to make sure that people on my campus know, I'm involved with CoSIDA, but I'm also here's opportunity to tell everybody on your campus what you're doing. And I think, again, it's not trying to grandstand. It's the whole idea of trying to educate a lot of people that may not know what you do. And some people might be like, well, I did this 2 years ago. People know what I'm doing. But you have to remember the mindset of there's constant changeover on campuses. There's constant changeover in your fan base. There's changeovers from your parent groups that support your team. So, to me, this is an opportunity to promote yourself, but also promote your profession and be proud of what you're doing at your school, conference office, and anything. And another thing is to show props or congratulations to other people in the field, which is great to see every year. And I feel like you're seeing that more now than ever before. But it's great to see those different congratulations going from SIDs. But then what happens is you start seeing more of the big time coaches getting involved, and there was a great one today from the Big East Commissioner, Val Ackerman, talking about Big East SIDs, and we didn't see that the first year that we were doing this, but now we're seeing this, and then people are expecting this from our organization, and it's great to see how far it's come and seeing it build up. And this afternoon, on Monday, we had a 3 p.m. push for a social media post from around the country from everybody to post at the same time. So we're being more strategic with it. I know we can do a better job maybe trying to get this information out to university public relations offices ahead of time. But we've done a lot as an organization and as a committee to try to champion this and support our members and make sure that they feel valued and supported and thanks for their efforts and everything they're doing for their school, their conference, and the profession.
Well, that being said, we hope everybody, as Sam had mentioned, joined in CoSIDA's mass thank your SID post today at 3:00, and that this recognition week will come to its close tomorrow. And we asked, not even during CoSIDA Appreciation Week, that you continue to show your appreciation for your fellow SIDs, especially in the next 24 hours, but even beyond that, and bring positive recognition to their work. And should you post to social media, please use the hashtags Thank Your SID and SIDs Make It Happen. So, Sam, you're getting ready to roll off from your presidency this coming June as we get set for another virtual convention, as we had mentioned. So, are there any, as you leave, is there any legacy that you're looking to leave off of as CoSIDA president? Any specific initiatives we should look forward to out of this year's convention from you?
Yeah. Hey, Ian, I would say I'm not worried about that. To me, my biggest focus is, the organization itself. People can deem whatever legacy it is whenever I'm gone, I guess. But just to know that I'm, super proud of this organization, its board and staff, and its members. It's definitely a highlight of my career to be the president of this organization, albeit virtually. But nevertheless, it is just an exciting opportunity and time for SIDs. And I think the one thing that was building up for me, in the officers rotation the last couple of years was I was working on a thing called the SID staffing working group. It was behind the scenes group. We were trying to kind of make our case as an organization to try to get to the point to champion more staffing for SID offices. And I think this is still an area that's needs improvement as far as a lot of one-person shops are outdated. I think a lot of the pay ranges are outdated. And I think we need to see some improvement there. And we have worked as an organization. We worked with Athlete Viewpoint recently with our survey to learn more about what's going on in different SID offices over the country and different divisions. And we got so much data that came out of that. And that was going to be our kind of jumping off point, this past spring into this SID staffing working group and trying to champion, more schools, more conferences, more divisions to try to add more staffing to the sports information offices. Because as we mentioned, being, basically your own sports network for your school, basically if somebody says like, Sam, we could, give you a promotion and more money, or I can give you another person. I would say I would take the other person. I need a multimedia person to help me juggle all the different video requests and all the different, photographs, video, graphic designs, all that stuff. And I know at the Division I level and some other levels, they do have that staffing and it's adequate, but it's also, assigned to certain sports. But for many of us, we're one, maybe two person shops with just some student workers, and we really could use another body. Especially, even for me at Gallaudet, we only have 14 sports, but in the fall I will have football, volleyball, and soccer all going at the same time, and it is really difficult. So again, I think, as far as legacy, I'm not worried about that, and just want to keep pushing forward with the organization. I think we're doing some amazing work, as I mentioned, about the racial and social justice. It's great to see CoSIDA continue to champion different initiatives and be leaders within collegiate athletics. And we're seeing, people coming to our webinars that aren't members of our organization because they're learning from us, and we're bringing in people that they want to hear from. So I think, if anything, it's just been great to see CoSIDA over time, following people talk about getting a seat at the table. I think, what we've done as an organization in the last 5 years, to become more reputable and be a source and be a place for solutions and be a part of the, crisis communications and strategic communications for a lot of conferences and offices and athletic departments has been instrumental.
Sam, I now want to bring this conversation full circle, and we really started out talking about why we became SIDs, and I want to bring it back there because even though you've been in this business now for a decade and a half, do you ever say to yourself that as you look back on all these years that this is where I was meant to be? I was meant to be an SID?
I think so. I think about that too. As I mentioned, my whole background was building up to becoming an SID, and I probably just didn't know it at the time. And, again, if I had to redo it, I would probably become an SID sooner than later than, what my career path was. But again, looking back at it, I love being an SID. I love this job. As difficult as some of these weekends and days are, again, it goes back to, you're getting paid to cover games and the write about sports and promote, for me, a unique university with some awesome stories and student athletes and coaches that I have a pleasure to work with. But again, it's, the nuts and bolts of everything. I couldn't think of a better job. Now, I will say, as I get older and my family's, my daughters are getting older, it's tough not always being there on key events. So again, this year in the pandemic and being home, it's been awesome to be more part of their lives. So that's where it gets a little difficult, and I think that's a lot of SIDs, across the nation have the same issues when it comes to that. Like it's with families or starting families, or even dealing with your own family and your parents and stuff like that, where there's life comes at you, and there's life moments that you have to deal with, and it makes it difficult when maybe you're stuck with being at a game, and there might be another crisis or something going on that you can't always be there for. Even of course, exciting things like a wedding or a
Sure.
birthday party and stuff. So, I think the people that are SIDs are super passionate about the profession. They do an amazing job, and they're just great people. And I'm proud and lucky to be associated with those individuals.
So, Sam, that being said, who would you say have been just your biggest role models, your biggest inspiration to help you achieve what you have in life?
Yeah, and I think for a lot of us, it starts at home. My parents were big supporters of mine. My late father was a big supporter and probably like my number one fan when it came to things, and he always thought it was so cool to the different games I would go to, or getting a press pass. And so I definitely wish he was still here with us to see these different moments of the last couple of years of me moving up in this profession, with the basketball committee, with CoSIDA, within Gallaudet. So for me, it starts with him and my mom, and then within the industry itself. I look at what a lot of the younger SIDs are doing nowadays. I get inspired by them and seeing what they're doing, and seeing other SIDs I've kind of come up through the ranks with, Ryan Klinkner, Jim Heath, and a couple others have been great. But then others like Lenny Wright and Aaron Saygraves, and seeing other SIDs too that have gone on to becoming an AD. For me, being a Florida Gator fan, I'm a huge Scott Strickland fan. He started off his career as an SID, and Greg Byrne at Alabama. So it's great seeing those individuals going on to becoming ADs and being leaders within collegiate athletics, and those people I kind of look up to.
So, as we had said at the top of the interview here, Sam, is that we're still in such a time of turnover and turmoil with respect to what's going on with the pandemic, and so many people losing their jobs. Others, in hiring freezes and trying to find jobs. And what would be your advice at this point, not just to someone looking for a job right now, but also just to an aspiring SID, someone who just wants to get their foot in the door and right now is having a difficult time doing so?
Yeah, and they always say sometimes timing is everything. And unfortunately right now, it seems like this is bad timing across the board, not just in our industry, but in a lot of different industries. So I would just kind of preach patience right now. And again, just trying to be dedicated to what you're trying to become a part of. I've answered a couple emails this year and tweets from individuals of the same question. And I would just say right now, if you're young and trying to get into this, if you're at a college, get involved with your SID office, trying to volunteer. I know there may not be a lot of games going on, but as we said to Ian, there's always work to be done in the SID office, even if it's going into the archives and history sections of a website, or just doing a feature story. But I would also,
no one will turn away help either, especially for when there's games going on.
I think some free swag and food sometimes goes a long way. But then again, I will also preach that, that's not the right thing too. Like, I think a lot of us, this is a tangent, but a lot of us volunteer our talents for these big tournaments, and we don't get compensated for it. So I would try to tell other SIDs, don't sell yourself short. I understand why a lot of people do it. They try to do it to help their friends, but also try to get their foot in the door at different schools or different levels. But also I would say, show some value for your time when you're working these different tournaments. But for those individuals trying to get in, volunteering at those tournaments is a good first step. Getting involved with a local college is a good step, or a local minor league baseball team, or minor league sports in general, or even just working out at a high school with their sports. And you're starting to see some SIDs now, some high schools, and especially in crazy football states like Texas, where they have full-time SIDs now at the high school level. So
Unbelievable.
you never know where you might start. And to me, it's always like not where you start, but where you end. So like to me, your own career path is going to go different directions that you cannot map out, right now, and that's okay. But I would say be persistent, reach out, network, try to volunteer, get involved, and then of course, timing is everything. Sometimes you're the right person at the right time, but also like if you have that network, and hopefully they can, you can use that network to your advantage, and trying to get into the business.
You had spoken about how the pandemic's been great for your family time, and that a lot of games that you had to go to forced you to miss certain events, and the last 10 months has allowed you to spend a lot of time with family. And then on top of that, you still have your school responsibility and your responsibility to your role as CoSIDA president. But during any free time that you may have, anywhere in between, Sam, have you taken on any hobbies, projects over that time? What really has kept you busy during quarantine besides all your work responsibility?
Bro, I'm playing with dolls when I got my free time here. I got my daughter's dollhouse over there. Like I mentioned before, virtual schooling with my daughters, Daddy Day School in session. My wife teaches, but she has to teach at her school remotely, but in her classroom. So I'm running Daddy Day School and doing Gallaudet work and CoSIDA calls at the same time. But I will say a lot of things that were on the the house to-do list got done this year. So a lot of projects around the house that we never had time for became more handy with plumbing and different things that we hadn't had a chance to do. So that's been the big focus.
I must say then you are the epitome then, I guess, Sam, of putting together the tea party for your daughters and
girl dad, man, girl dad.
That's listen. I speak to it. I'm a dad of a 2.5-year-old. I'm not at the point where we're playing with dolls and doing tea parties yet, but we'll get there for sure.
Yeah, it's the best, man. Like I will say, being my most favorite job is being a dad to my two daughters, Claire and Molly.
100%. There's nothing better than being a parent. Last question for you, Sam. I have to know: can anyone pull off the bow tie better than you can?
I don't know. Like, to me, I'm sure Patrick Walsh will say that he's the home of the bow tie. And funny story for me, like I've always loved the look of a bow tie, kind of like the old school throwback and the kind of preppy look. But also, another tip here was like I kind of also wore the bow tie to kind of stick out and stand out at the time. And people get disappointed now when I'm not rocking the bow tie, but I kind of go for that new age AD look where the button down, open collar with a sport jacket to try to go in that trend. But especially when we have to dress up, I'm rocking the bow tie.
I was gonna say, bring the bow tie back, Sam. We want it back.
Oh, without a doubt. I definitely will rock it when I need to. I love the clean look of a bow tie. You're not having a tie, fall down and like, get ruined by soda or, salad dressing or anything like that. So like bow ties look clean. I think I have the confidence to pull it off. But that's the biggest thing. I think you need to have the confidence and you need to be able to pull it off with a nice looking suit or jacket. Sometimes if you don't, you're going to look like a clown.
Well, I think the only problem though with a bow tie sometimes is just that, if you're sitting down to eat and you're in formal wear, you don't have the long tie to catch a possible stain. So if that shirt gets stained, it's going to be staring right back at you.
Goes back to confidence, Ian. You got to be confident that you're not going to make any spills. No errors, and no ESID for me.
Well, Sam, we can't really thank you enough for coming on here tonight to the Primetime Rundown interview series, episode 50. So a milestone episode. And Sam, we were just so happy to have you. And thank you so much for coming on and for just fulfilling every duty that you have had to deal with in the wake of this pandemic as CoSIDA president. Thank you.
Well, Ian, I appreciate the time. I really enjoyed speaking with you and your viewers. Again, I'd just like to thank everybody who are members of CoSIDA. I know this has been a difficult year. Not a normal year, but we will get through it, and we'll get through it together. and dealing with different issues going on in your campuses. I encourage you to still try to be the change and help be a leader on your campus and within our profession. And again, I look forward to hopefully being back in person sooner rather than later, at a future convention or a future maybe NCAA convention. But I'm always happy to talk with somebody in this profession and help pay it forward, and help champion and be proud of what profession that we're a part of.
Well, Sam, I hope to chat with you at the 2021 virtual convention, and hopefully we can get together come Vegas time if I'm not in the Baltimore, D.C. area before then.
Let's make it happen, Ian.
Absolutely. But Sam, if you just mind hanging out for a few more minutes here before we go, we wanted to let all of our viewers know what's coming up on the Eastern Observer. We've amped up your wrestling fix with our newest show, the Daily Wrestling News Show, with Minutes to Bell Time's Ryan Joy every Monday through Thursday in the morning, starting at 10 a.m. And then tomorrow night, the guys are back. Al Carl, Tyler Adele, John Smith, Ryan Joy, John DeConti, and Gary Mahaffey for episode number 38 of the Essential Wrestling Podcast, with coverage beginning at 6 p.m. It will actually be a double dip tomorrow night, as following the Essential Wrestling Podcast, tune in for the next episode of the Primetime Rundown interview series. That'll be episode number 51 with Joey and University of Rhode Island head softball coach Bridget Hurlman. That coverage will begin at 8 p.m. immediately following EWP right here on the Eastern Observer. And then on Friday, Joey, Rob, and myself get you ready for Super Bowl 55 on the Primetime Rundown. That'll be this Friday, January 29th at 6 p.m. for episode number 49 of the Primetime Rundown. And lastly, the Rumble is here, and let our Essential Wrestling Podcast guys get you primed for it with their Royal Rumble special coming to you this Saturday, January 30th at 3 p.m. And all programming can also be seen on the I-95 Sports Network and Zingo Television Channel 198. And be sure to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. All of this powered by the Eastern Observer. One last time, ladies and gentlemen, for my special guest, the president of CoSIDA and the associate athletic director for strategic communications at Gallaudet University, Sam Atkinson. I'm Ian Schraier, and we'll see you next time.